Hey friend, welcome to Sleepy History World. Before we begin tonight's gentle journey into the past, I have one small favor to ask. If this channel becomes a place you enjoy returning to, where the slow pace, relaxing storytelling, and peaceful history help you unwind at the end of a long day, please take a moment to subscribe. It truly helps the channel grow and allows me to keep creating these quiet historical stories for you. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's step back in time together. Tonight, we're uncovering the unspoken foods that quietly helped many women stay slim during the 1950s. Forget modern diet trends, calorie-counting apps, and miracle weight loss secrets. The real story is far more fascinating. Hidden inside ordinary American kitchens were simple meals, forgotten ingredients, and everyday habits that quietly shaped an entire generation. From humble bowls of oatmeal and homemade soups to fresh garden vegetables and modest desserts, these women followed routines that seemed completely ordinary at the time, but may hold surprising lessons for us today. So settle into your favorite chair, wrap yourself in a cozy blanket, and let the gentle rhythm of history carry you back to a quieter decade where the refrigerator looked very different. Dinner was always served around the family table, and the greatest secret to staying slim wasn't hidden in a diet book at all. It was quietly waiting inside an ordinary 1950s kitchen. Imagine stepping into an ordinary American kitchen during the 1950s, where the morning sunlight slips through lace curtains. A polished chrome toaster sits patiently on the counter, and the gentle ticking of a wall clock quietly marks the beginning of another busy day. Breakfast is not rushed, nor is it a feast overflowing with endless choices. The refrigerator holds fewer temptations than a modern one. The pantry is neatly organized with practical ingredients, and every meal has a purpose beyond simply satisfying hunger. While magazines often celebrated glamorous movie stars with impossibly elegant figures, the average woman was following a collection of quiet eating habits that rarely made dramatic headlines. There was no talk of keto, intermittent fasting, calorie tracking apps, or miracle weight loss powders. Instead, many women stayed naturally slim because of the ordinary foods they ate every single day. Foods that have largely disappeared from modern tables or have been overshadowed by convenience meals and oversized portions. These were not secret recipes hidden away in family cookbooks or magical ingredients discovered by nutrition experts. They were simply everyday foods that fit naturally into a slower way of living, where meals were prepared with care, ingredients were respected, and overeating was surprisingly uncommon. The morning often began with something remarkably modest, a bowl of oatmeal simmered gently on the stove, filling the kitchen with a warm, comforting aroma. Unlike today's instant flavored packets loaded with sugar and artificial flavorings, this oatmeal was usually plain, with perhaps a splash of milk, a sprinkle of cinnamon, or a few slices of fresh fruit when available. It was filling enough to provide energy for hours of housework, shopping, or caring for children, without causing the dramatic sugar spikes that leave people hungry again shortly afterward. Eggs were another common breakfast choice, often boiled, scrambled, or lightly fried in small amounts of butter rather than drowning in oil. Toast appeared regularly, but the slices were modest in size, often spread with a thin layer of butter or homemade preserves, rather than towering beneath thick layers of chocolate spread or sugary toppings. Coffee was popular, Yet many women drank it black or with only a little milk and sugar, making it a simple companion rather than a dessert disguised as a beverage. Fresh fruit quietly played an important role throughout the day. Apples, oranges, peaches, pears, and seasonal berries were ordinary treats rather than carefully measured diet snacks. They were inexpensive when in season and commonly kept in bowls on kitchen tables, making them easy to grab whenever a small hunger appeared. There was no expectation that every craving required cookies or candy. A crisp apple often solved the problem just as effectively, while also providing fiber that kept people satisfied much longer. Bananas were popular as well, especially because they required no preparation at all. A woman finishing her morning chores might simply peel a banana before returning to folding laundry or hanging clothes outside, never thinking of it as part of a weight loss strategy. It was simply practical food. Vegetables appeared with astonishing frequency compared to many modern diets. Carrots, green beans, cabbage, peas, lettuce, spinach, tomatoes, onions, and celery found their way onto countless dinner plates. Salads were simple, usually consisting of crisp lettuce, sliced tomatoes, cucumbers, radishes, and perhaps a few onions with a light homemade dressing. Heavy, creamy dressings existed, but were used sparingly in many households because homemade vinaigrettes were cheaper and easier to prepare. Steamed vegetables often accompanied meals instead of being hidden beneath layers of cheese sauce. Cabbage, in particular, was remarkably common. It was inexpensive, lasted well without spoiling quickly, and could be transformed into slaws, soups, or cooked side dishes that added bulk to meals without adding excessive calories. Families appreciated its versatility long before anyone began calling it a superfood. Soup quietly earned its place as one of the most dependable meals in many homes. Homemade vegetable soup, chicken soup, bean soup, and beef barley soup stretched ingredients economically while creating satisfying meals that warmed both stomach and spirit. These soups were usually filled with vegetables, modest portions of meat, and flavorful broths rather than thick creams. A bowl of soup before dinner naturally reduced hunger, making enormous portions unnecessary. Women often prepared large pots that lasted several days, allowing leftovers to become convenient lunches without relying on packaged convenience foods that would become more common decades later. Beans quietly supported many families without attracting much attention. Navy beans, lima beans, kidney beans, black-eyed peas, and split peas provided affordable protein and fiber that helped people feel comfortably full. They appeared in soups, casseroles, salads, and simple side dishes. During times when meat was expensive, beans filled the gap remarkably well. They offered steady energy rather than the quick bursts associated with refined sugary foods. Women preparing meals understood their value through experience, even if they never discussed carbohydrates, glycemic indexes, or dietary fiber. Fish also appeared more frequently than many people realize. Tuna salads, baked cod, salmon, sardines, and mackerel were practical choices, especially in coastal regions or where canned fish was affordable. Sardines, though less fashionable today, were nutrient-rich and packed with healthy fats. They were often served on crackers or toast as quick lunches. Canned salmon became the foundation for salmon patties that stretched family budgets while delivering satisfying nutrition. These foods were ordinary household staples rather than specialty health products, displayed in expensive supermarket aisles. Milk occupied a central place in everyday life. Children drank it with meals, adults added it to cereals or coffee, and many recipes relied upon it. Yet portion sizes remained moderate. Sweetened flavored milk, oversized milkshakes, and elaborate coffee beverages were uncommon daily habits. Cottage cheese quietly gained popularity among women who appreciated its light texture and satisfying protein. It frequently appeared alongside sliced peaches, pineapple, tomatoes, or crisp lettuce as a refreshing lunch that felt substantial without being heavy. Yogurt was not nearly as widespread in America as it would later become, but cultured dairy products slowly found their place among health-conscious households. One unforgotten feature of 1950s eating was the remarkable simplicity of sandwiches. Lunch might consist of sliced turkey, roast beef, tuna salad, or egg salad, placed between two slices of bread with lettuce and tomato. There were no towering sandwiches stuffed with multiple layers of cheese, sauces, bacon, fried onions, and oversized meats. The bread itself was generally thinner than many artisan loaves available today. Potato chips occasionally accompanied lunch, but they arrived in much smaller servings than modern family-sized bags. A pickle, carrot sticks, or fresh fruit often completed the meal instead. Desserts certainly existed, and families enjoyed pies, cakes, puddings, cookies, and ice cream. The important difference lay in frequency and portion size. Dessert was often reserved for dinner or special occasions, rather than appearing after every meal and between meals as snacks. A slice of pie was typically smaller than many restaurant servings today. Ice cream came in modest bowls rather than towering cups overflowing with candy pieces, syrups, and whipped cream. Homemade desserts required effort, naturally limiting how often they appeared. Baking from scratch demanded time, ingredients, and planning, making sweets feel genuinely special instead of constantly available. Perhaps one of the greatest differences was the absence of constant snacking. Kitchens were not stocked with dozens of individually packaged snack foods designed for effortless grazing throughout the day. Women stayed busy with cooking, cleaning, shopping, sewing, gardening, volunteering, and raising children. Meals occurred at fairly regular times, and eating between them happened less frequently. Hunger was often accepted as a normal signal that the next meal was approaching, rather than an emergency requiring immediate satisfaction. This simple rhythm naturally limited unnecessary calorie consumption without requiring conscious discipline. Seasonal eating quietly influenced every household. Strawberries were enjoyed when strawberries were available. Peaches tasted sweetest during summer. Apples dominated autumn tables. Fresh produce reflected the time of year rather than global supply chains delivering everything every month. Frozen vegetables expanded convenience, but even these were usually plain vegetables without elaborate sauces. This seasonal pattern encouraged variety while preventing the endless abundance that can encourage mindless overeating today. Home gardens remained surprisingly common. Even suburban families often grew tomatoes, beans, cucumbers, lettuce, onions, herbs, and squash. Backyard gardens encouraged appreciation for vegetables because harvesting them required patience and effort. Freshly picked produce often became dinner within hours. The connection between growing food and eating it made waste less acceptable and vegetables more enjoyable. Canning fruits and vegetables also remained a familiar household skill, preserving summer harvests for colder months without relying heavily on artificial preservatives. Another overlooked food was gelatin-based salads, which became iconic during the decade. Imagine opening the refrigerator just before lunchtime in an ordinary 1950s home, and the contents would likely surprise many modern shoppers. There were no shelves overflowing with flavored yogurts, sugary drinks, frozen desserts, energy beverages, or rows of highly processed snack packs. Instead, the refrigerator held practical ingredients waiting to become meals rather than ready-to-eat temptations. A carton of milk sat beside a few eggs. Leftover roast chicken from the previous evening rested carefully wrapped in wax paper. Crisp lettuce waited inside the vegetable drawer, and perhaps a bowl of homemade potato salad or cooked green beans remained from dinner. Nothing seemed particularly exciting, yet that quiet simplicity shaped eating habits in ways few people noticed at the time. Women rarely wandered into the kitchen simply because they felt bored. Opening the refrigerator usually meant preparing a meal for the family, rather than searching for entertainment through food. Unforgotten favorite was the humble grapefruit. For many women, slicing a grapefruit in half before breakfast became an ordinary routine. Some sprinkled only the smallest amount of sugar across its surface, while others enjoyed its naturally tart flavor without adding anything at all. The fruit was refreshing, juicy, and satisfying, filling the stomach long before anyone understood the science behind fiber and water-rich foods. Although later decades would exaggerate the grapefruit into a fad diet icon, in the 1950s it was simply another fruit commonly found on the breakfast table, appreciated for its fresh taste rather than its reputation. Another quiet staple was homemade applesauce. Rather than buying brightly colored squeeze pouches filled with added sugars, families often simmered fresh apples with a little cinnamon until they softened into a smooth sauce. The natural sweetness of ripe apples meant very little sugar was needed. Children loved it, adults enjoyed it, and it often appeared beside pork chops or roast chicken as naturally as mashed potatoes. A bowl of applesauce could satisfy a craving for something sweet without leading to the heavy desserts that became increasingly common decades later. Cooked cereals extended far beyond oatmeal. Cream of wheat and other hot grain cereals appeared regularly during colder months. Prepared slowly on the stove, these breakfasts provided warmth and lasting fullness throughout busy mornings. They were rarely covered with marshmallows, syrups, or colourful candies. Instead, a little milk, perhaps a sprinkle of cinnamon or nutmeg, created enough flavour to make breakfast enjoyable. The emphasis remained on nourishment rather than excitement. Rice also appeared more often than people remember, though usually in much smaller portions than modern restaurant servings. It accompanied roasted meats, mixed into casseroles, or formed simple rice puddings made with milk and raisins. These rice puddings were lightly sweetened and served in modest bowls, offering comfort without becoming overwhelming. Even desserts respected moderation, partly because ingredients cost money and wasting food was considered careless. Many women also relied on leftovers in ways that now seem almost forgotten. Yesterday's roast beef became today's sandwich. Extra vegetables found their way into tomorrow's soup. Leftover chicken transformed into chicken salad with celery and a light amount of mayonnaise. Nothing needed to be discarded simply because it was no longer fresh from the oven. This practical approach reduced unnecessary cooking while avoiding constant reliance on packaged convenience meals. Every ingredient served multiple purposes, stretching both family budgets and household resources. Cheese appeared frequently, but usually in restrained amounts. A slice of cheddar accompanied lunch, grated Parmesan flavored pasta, or Swiss cheese rested inside a sandwich, but enormous quantities rarely covered every meal. Cheese added flavor, rather than becoming the meal itself. The same principle applied to butter. Butter certainly had its place, yet it was spread thinly across bread or melted gently over vegetables, instead of pouring generously over everything on the plate. Seasonings remained surprisingly simple. Salt, pepper, garlic, parsley, onion, paprika, mustard, vinegar, and fresh herbs provided most flavors. Heavy bottled sauces packed with sugar were uncommon in everyday cooking. Women learned to build flavor through careful cooking rather than depending on processed condiments. Slow roasting, gentle simmering, and fresh ingredients naturally created satisfying meals without overwhelming the palate. Fresh herbs growing outside the kitchen door quietly transformed ordinary meals. Chives sprinkled over potatoes, parsley stirred into soups, dill mixed into cucumber salads, and mint served alongside fruit all added brightness without adding calories. Small kitchen gardens made these herbs inexpensive and readily available. Many women clipped only what they needed moments before serving dinner, preserving both freshness and flavor. Canned vegetables often receive criticism today, yet during the 1950s they played a valuable role in family meals. Green beans, corn, peas, tomatoes, and beets offered convenience long before supermarkets carried every vegetable year. Round, although fresh produce remained desirable whenever possible. Canned vegetables helped families maintain balanced meals during winter. They were usually heated plainly with a little butter or seasoning, rather than transformed into heavily processed side dishes loaded with cream and cheese. Owen's surprisingly common lunch consisted of tomato slices, cottage cheese, crisp lettuce, and a few crackers. It looked almost too simple to satisfy anyone accustomed to oversized fast food meals. Yet it provided protein, vitamins, hydration, and enough energy to continue working through the afternoon. Meals did not need to impress social media or photograph beautifully. They simply needed to nourish. Many women also enjoyed baked fruit. Apples stuffed with raisins and cinnamon slowly baked until tender filled homes with comforting aromas during autumn and winter. Pears and peaches occasionally received similar treatment. These desserts relied upon the fruit's natural sweetness instead of heavy frostings or sugary glazes. Families finished dinner feeling pleasantly satisfied rather than overwhelmingly full. Nuts occasionally appeared as snacks, particularly walnuts, pecans, or peanuts, but handfuls remained small because nuts were valued rather than endlessly available. A few nuts paired with fruit created satisfying afternoon refreshments without encouraging continuous grazing. Even popcorn, when prepared at home, contained far less butter and salt than the oversized tubs associated with modern cinemas. Bread baking remained a familiar weekend activity in many households. Fresh loaves cooling on the kitchen counter filled homes with unforgettable aromas. Because homemade bread required effort, people appreciated every slice. It was eaten with meals rather than mindlessly throughout the day. Thick layers of sugary spreads rarely covered each piece, Sometimes bread needed nothing more than a little butter while still warm from the oven. Dinner itself followed a rhythm that remained remarkably consistent. A modest serving of meat occupied one section of the plate. Beside it rested potatoes, rice, or another starch. The remaining space belonged almost entirely to vegetables or salad. The proportions naturally limited excess without requiring measuring cups or calorie charts. Plates themselves were generally smaller than many dinner plates used today, making ordinary portions appear generous while quietly reducing overall food intake. Eating out remained an occasional pleasure instead of a frequent routine. Restaurant meals celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, or special family gatherings. Most cooking happened at home, where ingredients could be controlled and portions naturally remained more reasonable. Fast food existed, but had not yet become a daily habit for millions of families. Convenience had not completely replaced cooking skills, and many women took pride in preparing nourishing meals from simple ingredients. Children also influenced household eating patterns. Mothers often prepared one meal for everyone, rather than separate menus for adults and children. This encouraged balanced eating because vegetables, soups, fruits, and wholesome foods appeared on every plate regardless of age. Family members generally ate together at the same time, reinforcing regular meal schedules and reducing endless snacking throughout the day. Perhaps the greatest forgotten ingredient of all was patience. Bread dough rose slowly. Soup simmered for hours. Stews became richer with time. Vegetables were washed, peeled, chopped, and prepared by hand. Even desserts required mixing bowls, measuring cups, and careful baking. Food demanded attention before it rewarded the cook. That slower relationship with meals encouraged greater appreciation for every bite. Eating became the conclusion of effort rather than the beginning of another search for something else to consume. Looking back, the foods themselves were never extraordinary. A bowl of oatmeal, fresh fruit, homemade soup, crisp vegetables, cottage cheese, beans, roast chicken, baked potatoes, simple sandwiches, and modest desserts hardly sound revolutionary. Yet together they quietly created a lifestyle where fullness arrived naturally, excess remained uncommon, and healthy body weight often followed without elaborate diet plans. The secret was never hidden inside one miraculous ingredient. It existed in countless ordinary choices repeated day after day, week after week, until those habits became so normal that hardly anyone thought of them as secrets at all. Imagine walking through a neighborhood grocery store during the middle of the 1950s, pushing a simple metal shopping cart whose wheels squeak softly across the polished floor. The shelves appear surprisingly modest compared to the enormous supermarkets of today. There are fewer brands competing for attention, fewer brightly colored packages promising instant happiness, and far fewer products designed purely for snacking. Most aisles are filled with ingredients rather than finished meals. Flour waits beside sugar, dried beans fill cloth sacks, canned vegetables line neat rows, and fresh produce occupies a much smaller section than modern shoppers might expect. Yet nearly every item has a clear purpose in someone's kitchen. Women often arrived with handwritten shopping lists, carefully planned around the week's meals, reducing impulse purchases and unnecessary waste. Every dollar mattered, and every ingredient needed to justify its place in the pantry. One food that quietly supported many families was plain yogurt, although it was far less common in America than it would later become. In households that enjoyed it, Yogurt was rarely sweetened with candy, cookie crumbs, or flavored syrups. Instead, it might be served with sliced peaches, fresh berries during summer, or a drizzle of honey reserved for special occasions. Its tart taste reflected a time when foods were not expected to taste intensely sweet. Palates adjusted naturally to subtle flavors, making fresh fruit seem wonderfully satisfying without needing additional sugar. Another overlooked favorite was prunes. While they often became the subject of jokes in later years, prunes appeared regularly on breakfast tables and alongside evening meals. Women appreciated them for their natural sweetness and the gentle feeling of fullness they provided. Dried fruits in general, including raisins, dates, and figs, were enjoyed in moderation because they stored well and remained available even when fresh fruit was out of season. They added sweetness to oatmeal, homemade breads, and rice puddings without requiring large amounts of refined sugar. Simple broth-based meals quietly filled countless kitchens. Sometimes lunch consisted of nothing more than a clear chicken broth with vegetables and a slice of bread. Such meals may seem unusually light by today's standards, yet they comfortably satisfied people whose daily routines remained active. Rich cream-based soups certainly existed, but they were balanced by many lighter soups that emphasized vegetables, herbs, and slow-cooked stock rather than heavy dairy. Pickled vegetables also occupied an important place on many tables. Cucumbers, beets, onions, and cabbage, preserved through pickling, added bright flavors to meals while requiring very few ingredients. A small serving beside roasted meat or sandwiches provided crunch and variety without relying on fried side dishes. These preserved foods reflected practical household traditions passed from one generation to another. Even desserts often carried traces of fruit rather than chocolate. Baked pears sprinkled with cinnamon, poached peaches served chilled berry cobblers made during harvest season, or simple fruit compotes appeared regularly after dinner. These desserts celebrated whatever nature provided at that particular time of year. They tasted sweet because the fruit itself had ripened naturally, not because enormous amounts of sugar had been added afterward. Home-made jams and preserves deserve mention as well. Although they contained sugar, they were generally spread thinly across toast rather than squeezed generously from oversized plastic bottles. A single jar often represented hours of work spent washing fruit, sterilizing jars, and carefully preserving the harvest. That effort encouraged appreciation and moderation. Nothing was wasted casually. Cold meat slices frequently became the centerpiece of simple lunches. Thin slices of turkey, ham, roast beef, or chicken paired with tomatoes, lettuce, and perhaps a boiled egg created balanced meals requiring little preparation. There was no expectation that lunch had to be enormous. It simply needed to provide enough nourishment to continue the day's responsibilities. Boiled eggs themselves became one of the most dependable foods of the decade. Easy to prepare, inexpensive, portable, and satisfying. They appeared in lunch boxes, picnics, salads, and evening snacks. Women rarely viewed them through the lens of high-protein diets or fitness culture. They simply recognized eggs as practical, nourishing food that kept hunger away for hours. Tea quietly accompanied many afternoons, especially in homes where coffee was reserved for mornings. Served without elaborate sweeteners or flavored creamers, tea encouraged people to pause briefly before returning to their daily routines. The beverage itself contained almost no calories, yet it provided warmth, comfort, and a pleasant ritual that often replaced unnecessary snacking. Even celebrations reflected a different relationship with food. Birthday cakes, holiday pies, and festive cookies certainly appeared. But celebrations remained occasional rather than constant. Everyday life was not filled with endless reasons to indulge. Office parties, daily coffee shop treats, convenience, store snacks, and constant dessert promotions had not yet become woven into ordinary routines. Special foods remained genuinely special because they appeared less frequently. Perhaps one of the greatest differences involved expectations. Women did not expect every meal to deliver excitement, surprise, or indulgence. Many meals were intentionally familiar. Monday's dinner resembled last Monday's dinner. Soup appeared every week. Oatmeal returned regularly. Salads changed only slightly with the seasons. This consistency removed much of the constant decision making that surrounds modern eating habits. Familiar meals became comforting traditions instead of boring repetitions. There was also a quiet respect for hunger itself. Feeling hungry before dinner was perfectly normal. It signaled that the body had used the previous meal's energy exactly as intended. Instead of immediately reaching for packaged snacks, many women simply continued their work until mealtime arrived. That small habit alone naturally limited the number of calories consumed throughout the day. Television was only beginning to enter American homes, and programming occupied far fewer hours than today. Families spent less time absent-mindedly eating in front of screens. Dinner conversations remained an important part of family life, allowing meals to unfold slowly. Eating while distracted by endless entertainment became far less common than it is now. Even grocery shopping happened less frequently. Without giant refrigerators and freezers filled with ready-made foods, households purchased only what they genuinely expected to use. Fresh vegetables encouraged prompt cooking before spoilage occurred. Leftovers received creative second lives because replacing wasted food required another trip to the market. Looking back across the decade, the foods themselves appear wonderfully ordinary. There were no miracle powders, expensive supplements, detox juices, protein bars, or fashionable superfoods imported from distant countries. Instead, ordinary kitchens quietly relied on oatmeal, eggs, cabbage, apples, carrots, potatoes, beans, homemade soup, seasonal fruit, simple sandwiches, fresh salads, baked fish, roast chicken, cottage cheese, yogurt, herbs, and homemade bread. These foods worked not because they possessed magical powers, but because they fit naturally into a slower rhythm of living where moderation happened almost automatically. In many ways, the greatest secret of the 1950s was not hidden inside any single recipe. It was hidden in the quiet belief that food existed first to nourish the body, bring families together around the table, and provide steady strength for another ordinary day. That forgotten philosophy, more than any individual ingredient, may have been the true reason so many women maintained healthy figures without ever believing they were following a diet at all. As the afternoon slowly faded into evening, another quiet pattern began to appear in homes across the 1950s. Dinner preparations started well before anyone sat down to eat. Vegetables were washed at the sink. Potatoes were peeled by hand. Onions were chopped carefully on wooden cutting boards. and meat slowly roasted in the oven while filling the house with comforting aromas. There was no app to order dinner with a single tap, no frozen meal waiting to be heated in minutes, and no delivery driver arriving with oversized portions. Preparing food required time, and because it required time, every meal carried a sense of value. Families appreciated what was placed before them because someone had invested effort into creating it. One forgotten habit involved serving vegetables first. While the main dish finished cooking, women often placed bowls of sliced cucumbers, tomatoes, celery, carrots, or lettuce on the table. Family members naturally ate some of these fresh vegetables while waiting for dinner, taking the edge off their hunger before richer foods arrived. Nobody referred to this as an appetite control strategy. It was simply practical hospitality that quietly encouraged healthier eating. Another interesting food was the baked sweet potato. Although ordinary white potatoes remained more common, sweet potatoes frequently appeared during colder months and holiday seasons. Their natural sweetness meant they needed very little added sugar. A small pat of butter and perhaps a sprinkle of cinnamon were often enough. Unlike today's dessert, like sweet potato casseroles topped with marshmallows, everyday versions remained simple and nourishing. Corn on the cob was another seasonal favorite during harvest time. Families enjoyed fresh ears of corn with only a little butter and salt. Eating corn directly from the cob naturally slowed the meal. Every bite required attention, making it nearly impossible to rush through dinner. This slower pace gave the body time to recognize fullness before anyone reached for unnecessary second servings. Fresh tomatoes deserve special attention because they tasted remarkably different from many supermarket tomatoes today. Backyard gardens produced juicy, fragrant tomatoes, ripened naturally under the summer sun. Thick slices appeared in sandwiches, salads, or simply sprinkled with salt and pepper. Their rich flavor required no complicated sauces. Many women eagerly waited each summer for tomato season, knowing those few months offered some of the finest eating of the year. Homemade coleslaw quietly accompanied countless meals. Finely shredded cabbage mixed with carrots and a light dressing provided crunch, freshness, and fiber. Unlike some modern versions swimming in heavy mayonnaise, many homemade recipes balanced creaminess with vinegar, keeping the dish refreshing rather than overwhelming. Cabbage itself remained one of the most economical vegetables available, making it a reliable staple regardless of family income. Another nearly forgotten food was stewed tomatoes. Fresh tomatoes simmered gently with onions, herbs, and sometimes a small amount of breadcrumbs became a comforting side dish served beside meat or poultry. Their bright acidity balanced richer foods beautifully while adding very few calories. Recipes like these reflected a generation skilled at making simple ingredients taste satisfying without relying on excessive fats or sugars. Many women also prepared fruit salads that contained exactly what the name suggested. Fruit, apples, oranges, grapes, bananas, peaches, pears, and berries were combined according to the season, sometimes with a squeeze of lemon juice to keep everything fresh. Heavy whipped toppings or sugary syrups were usually absent from everyday versions. The fruit itself provided enough sweetness to make the dish enjoyable. During summer, iced tea became a household favorite. Unlike today's oversized sweet teas, containing astonishing amounts of sugar, many families brewed tea at home and sweetened it only lightly or not at all. A glass of cold tea offered refreshment after working in the garden, hanging laundry, or cleaning the house without contributing hundreds of unnecessary calories. Another quiet difference appeared after dinner. Once the evening meal ended and dishes were washed, the kitchen often closed for the night. There were no midnight refrigerator raids, endless bowls of cereal while watching television, or constant trips to the pantry for snacks. If someone became slightly hungry later, they frequently waited until breakfast. This long overnight break gave the digestive system time to rest, even though nobody spoke about fasting or metabolic health. Children growing up during this period also developed different expectations. They understood that treats were earned rather than guaranteed. A cookie after school felt exciting precisely because it was not available every hour of the day. Candy remained associated with holidays, birthdays, or trips to the cinema rather than everyday life. This naturally reduced sugar intake without requiring strict household rules. Even the size of kitchen equipment reflected smaller portions. Mixing bowls, serving dishes, drinking glasses, and dessert bowls were generally more modest than many modern versions. A glass of milk often held 8 ounces rather than 24. Ice cream bowls looked tiny compared to today's oversized dessert dishes. Without realizing it, families consumed appropriate portions because the dishes themselves quietly encouraged moderation. The culture surrounding leftovers also revealed remarkable practicality. A remaining chicken carcass rarely went into the trash immediately. Instead, it became tomorrow's soup stock. Vegetable peels sometimes flavored broths, stale bread transformed into bread pudding or stuffing. Every ingredient offered one final purpose before being discarded. This mindset reduced waste while encouraging homemade meals instead of constant shopping for new foods. Many women also preserved fruits and vegetables through canning. Rows of glass jars filled basement shelves, containing peaches, pears, green beans, tomatoes, pickles, applesauce, and jams prepared months earlier. Opening one of these jars during winter brought a taste of summer back to the dinner table. The preserved food contained recognizable ingredients, because the woman who canned it knew exactly what had gone inside. There was also far less pressure to constantly experiment with new diets. Magazine articles occasionally discussed healthy eating, but ordinary women rarely spent every week chasing the latest nutritional trend. Instead, they relied upon recipes passed from mothers and grandmothers who had learned through experience how to prepare filling meals using affordable ingredients. Generations of practical knowledge quietly shaped everyday eating habits. Perhaps the most overlooked ingredient of all was satisfaction. Meals were designed to leave people comfortably full, not stuffed to the point of discomfort. There was a clear difference between feeling nourished and feeling overfed. Women learned to recognize that difference naturally because meals occurred at predictable times and distractions were fewer. They listened to their appetites long before calorie counters, fitness trackers, or smartphone apps attempted to interpret hunger for them. Looking back now, it becomes clear that the unspoken foods of the 1950s were not hidden treasures waiting to be rediscovered. They had always been sitting quietly in ordinary kitchens, bowls of oatmeal, fresh vegetables, homemade soups, baked fish, roast chicken, beans, cabbage, apples, carrots, tomatoes, eggs, cottage cheese, seasonal fruits, simple salads, and freshly baked bread. Their true strength came from the way they worked together within a lifestyle built around home cooking, patience, moderation, and daily movement. Long before nutrition became an industry worth billions of dollars, countless women followed these quiet habits without giving them a second thought. They simply cooked, served, shared, and enjoyed ordinary meals that gently nourished both body and family, leaving behind a lesson that still feels surprisingly modern, despite belonging to a world that disappeared more than half a century ago. As evening settled over neighborhoods across America, kitchen windows glowed softly beneath porch lights, and another familiar ritual quietly unfolded inside thousands of homes. The dinner table became more than a place to eat. It was where the family gathered after a day of work, school, errands, and household chores. The radio might be playing softly in another room, but once everyone sat down, the focus shifted almost entirely to the meal itself. Plates were passed from one person to another, vegetables were served before anyone reached for dessert, and conversations often lasted longer than the meal required. Eating slowly was never promoted as a health technique, yet it naturally became part of every. By the time dinner ended, most people felt comfortably satisfied, instead of painfully full-blown food that quietly appeared throughout the decade was the baked apple. During cooler months, women often cored fresh apples, filled the center with raisins, cinnamon, or chopped nuts, and baked them until the fruit became soft enough to cut with a spoon. The kitchen filled with the sweet fragrance of apples and spices, creating a dessert that felt indulgent despite containing remarkably simple ingredients. The natural sugars inside the fruit intensified during baking, meaning very little additional sugar was necessary. Children eagerly looked forward to these desserts, often unaware that they were eating something far lighter than the rich cakes and pastries that would become more common in later decades. Homemade vegetable casseroles also played an important role. Unlike many modern casseroles overloaded with processed sauces and cheese, everyday versions often relied on fresh beans, carrots, peas, onions, squash, or cauliflower, mixed with simple seasonings and baked until tender. They stretched ingredients economically, while ensuring vegetables remained a significant part of every dinner. Families rarely questioned whether vegetables should appear on the table. Their presence was simply expected. During spring and summer, fresh lettuce became especially valuable. Garden lettuce was crisp, slightly sweet, and harvested only moments before reaching the kitchen. Women often built simple salads with lettuce, sliced radishes, green onions, cucumbers, and tomatoes, tossing everything together with homemade vinaigrette. Bottled dressings certainly existed, but many preferred making their own because it cost less and tasted fresher. These salads added color and freshness to meals while naturally filling part of the stomach before richer foods were eaten. Chicken itself looked very different from today's oversized portions. A roasted chicken often served an entire family, meaning each person received a sensible amount, rather than an enormous breast covering half the dinner plate. Leftover meat never went to waste. The following day it might become chicken soup, chicken sandwiches, or chicken salad, mixed with celery and a small amount of mayonnaise. Every meal connected to the next, creating an efficient cycle that reduced waste while keeping meals interesting. Seasonal berries brought another quiet pleasure. Strawberries arrived for only a brief period each year, making them something to appreciate rather than expect every month. Blueberries, blackberries, and raspberries followed similar patterns depending on the region. Families often enjoyed them with milk, folded into homemade pancakes, or simply eaten fresh after being picked. Their short growing season made them feel special without needing elaborate recipes. Many women also relied on simple grain dishes that have become less common today. Barley appeared in soups, cracked wheat occasionally accompanied dinner, and whole grains quietly added texture and nourishment without attracting much attention. These foods digested slowly, helping people remain satisfied long after meals ended. Nobody referred to them as complex carbohydrates. They were simply traditional ingredients that generations had trusted. Even the pace of grocery shopping influenced eating habits. Most households planned meals before leaving home, purchasing exactly what they expected to cook during the coming days. Refrigerators were smaller, freezers were limited, and pantry space encouraged thoughtful buying rather than endless stockpiling. Because fresh food spoiled more quickly, women cooked regularly instead of relying on highly processed products designed to remain edible for months. Zone-forgotten custom involved sharing food with neighbours. Extra vegetables from the garden, homemade bread, fresh peaches or jars of preserved fruit were often exchanged between nearby families. This created natural variety without encouraging excessive buying. A basket of tomatoes from one garden might be traded for cucumbers from another, allowing everyone to enjoy fresh produce while strengthening neighborhood relationships. Another overlooked aspect was the absence of constant advertising encouraging people to eat. Today's world surrounds people with food commercials, social media recipes, snack promotions, and delivery notifications from morning until night. During the 1950s, those constant reminders barely existed. People usually thought about food when it was time to prepare or enjoy a meal, not every few minutes throughout the day. This reduced the endless cycle of cravings that modern marketing often creates. Even holiday meals, though generous, remained occasional events rather than everyday standards. Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas feasts, Easter lunches, and family reunions offered opportunities to enjoy richer foods, but everyone understood they were special occasions. Ordinary Tuesdays looked very different from holiday celebrations. Everyday meals returned quickly to soups, vegetables, modest portions of meat, potatoes, fruit, and homemade bread. Another quiet contributor to healthy eating was sleep. Many households followed fairly consistent schedules. Dinner happened early enough for dishes to be washed before the evening ended. Children went to bed at regular times, and adults usually retired long before midnight. Without late-night television or endless digital entertainment, people spent fewer hours awake searching for snacks. Their eating naturally aligned with daylight, creating long overnight periods without food. Water also deserves recognition. While soft drinks certainly existed, they were not consumed in the enormous quantities seen today. A glass of water often accompanied household chores, gardening, or outdoor activities. Milk remained common during meals, while coffee and tea served specific moments of the day. Constant sipping of sugary beverages simply was not part of most daily routines. The kitchen itself encouraged mindfulness. Every slice of bread had to be cut. Every potato required peeling. Every carrot needed washing. Every soup demanded stirring. Cooking engaged the senses long before eating began. Women smelled herbs as they chopped them. listened to vegetables sizzling gently in pans, and tasted sauces carefully before serving. This close connection with food encouraged appreciation rather than careless consumption. Perhaps the greatest lesson hidden inside these ordinary kitchens was that healthy eating rarely felt restrictive. Women were not constantly calculating calories or fearing every bite of butter. They celebrated birthdays with cake, enjoyed pie after Sunday dinner, and welcomed ice cream during hot summer evenings. The difference was that these pleasures fit naturally within a pattern of balanced meals instead of replacing them. Treats remained occasional highlights instead of daily expectations. Looking back now, the unspoken foods that quietly helped many women remain slim were not expensive, fashionable, or difficult to prepare. They were the foods growing in backyard gardens, simmering in soup pots, cooling on windowsills, or resting inside simple pantries. Apples, cabbage, beans, carrots, eggs, tomatoes, oatmeal, fresh berries, baked fish, roast chicken, homemade bread, seasonal vegetables, cottage cheese, soups and salads created a way of eating built upon consistency rather than perfection. Their true power came not from any miraculous nutritional secret, but from the calm rhythm they created. One where food nourished the body, respected the seasons, minimized waste, and brought families together around the table. In that quiet rhythm, hidden beneath ordinary meals and everyday routines, lay one of the most overlooked reasons so many women of the 1950s maintained healthy figures without ever believing they possessed a secret at all. As another week unfolded in the 1950s, the kitchen continued to follow a rhythm that barely changed from season to season. Monday's grocery shopping influenced Tuesday's soup. Wednesday's roast became Thursday's sandwiches, and Friday often featured fish or a simple casserole that made good use of whatever ingredients remained. There was very little thought of constantly reinventing meals. Familiarity was comforting rather than boring. Housewives became remarkably skilled at creating variety from a relatively small collection of ingredients, proving that satisfying food did not require endless choices. In many ways, having fewer options made eating simpler. Decisions became easier, waste became smaller, and meals quietly settled into dependable routines that naturally supported moderation. A bowl of homemade vegetable stew perfectly reflected this philosophy. Into one large pot went carrots, onions, celery, potatoes, cabbage, tomatoes, peas, and whatever vegetables happened to be available that week. A modest amount of beef or chicken added flavor rather than dominating the dish. Everything simmered slowly until the vegetables softened and the broth became rich with their natural sweetness. The result was filling without feeling heavy. A single bowl could satisfy someone for hours because it contained fiber, water, and nourishing ingredients. Instead of refined starches alone, families often returned for another ladle of vegetables rather than reaching immediately for bread or dessert. Even breakfast cereals looked remarkably different. Many popular cereals contained far less sugar than modern versions, and children frequently added sliced bananas, peaches, or berries to make them more enjoyable. Sweetness came from fruit rather than colourful marshmallows or sugary coatings. Milk completed the meal, creating a breakfast that remained satisfying until lunchtime without causing dramatic swings in energy. The kitchen pantry itself tells an interesting story. Open the cabinet doors, and instead of brightly coloured snack boxes, you would likely find bags of flour, rolled oats, dried beans, rice, pasta, canned tomatoes, spices, vinegar, baking powder, and jars of preserved fruit. Nearly every item required preparation before it could be eaten. Convenience existed, but it had not yet replaced cooking. This meant that grabbing something to eat always involved at least a little effort, naturally discouraging constant snacking. Another forgotten food was liver. Although many people today avoid it, liver appeared regularly in countless households because it was affordable and exceptionally nutritious, often served with onions and mashed potatoes. It provided iron, protein, and vitamins. At a time when wasting nutritious food was considered unwise. Children did not always enjoy it, but mothers appreciated its value and served it anyway. Fresh peas deserve recognition as well. During springtime, families often shelled peas by hand while talking together around the kitchen table. It was repetitive work, but it also became a quiet family activity. The freshly shelled peas were then lightly cooked with butter and herbs, creating a side dish whose sweetness came entirely from the vegetable itself. That kind of freshness is difficult to replicate with heavily processed foods. Simple desserts remained closely tied to the seasons. Rhubarb pie appeared briefly in spring. Peach cobblers arrived in late summer. Apple crisps welcomed autumn, and citrus fruits brightened winter tables. These desserts encouraged anticipation because they could not be enjoyed all year long. Waiting became part of the pleasure. When strawberry season finally arrived, strawberries tasted extraordinary because families had spent months without them. Another quiet habit involved serving water with lemon slices during warm weather. It refreshed without adding sugar, and no one considered it unusual. Soft drinks remained occasional luxuries rather than everyday necessities. A bottle of soda might accompany a picnic, a birthday party, or a trip into town, but ordinary weekday meals rarely required sweet beverages. Women also became experts at stretching ingredients without sacrificing nutrition. A single chicken might provide Sunday dinner, Monday sandwiches, Tuesday soup, and Wednesday stock for cooking rice or vegetables. Bones were simmered for hours instead of being discarded immediately. Vegetable scraps flavored broth before finally reaching the compost pile or feeding farm animals in rural communities. This careful use of food reflected both economic necessity and genuine respect for the effort required to produce it. Eating with the seasons also meant accepting that some foods simply were not available. If fresh peaches disappeared after summer, families waited patiently until the following year. There was little expectation that supermarkets should import every fruit from every corner of the world regardless of season. This natural limitation encouraged people to appreciate foods while they lasted instead of taking them for granted. The pace of life outside the kitchen mattered too. Walking remained part of ordinary routines. Children walked to school. Mothers walked to neighborhood shops. Families walked to church on Sundays or visited nearby friends without automatically starting the car. These everyday movements quietly balanced the food they consumed. Exercise was rarely separated into scheduled workout sessions because physical activity already existed throughout daily life. Perhaps one of the most fascinating differences was how people viewed hunger. Today, advertisements often suggest that every small feeling of hunger should be answered immediately with a snack. In the 1950s, a rumbling stomach simply meant lunchtime or dinner was approaching. Women trusted that the next meal would arrive soon enough. This calm attitude prevented countless unnecessary calories from slipping unnoticed into the day. Even table manners influenced eating speed. Families generally remained seated until everyone finished. Meals unfolded through conversation, laughter, and stories about the day. Children learned not to rush, and adults rarely hurried through dinner in 10 minutes before returning to separate rooms. This slower rhythm gave the body time to recognize fullness naturally, reducing the temptation to continue eating simply because food remained on the table. Another overlooked factor was gratitude. Many adults living during the 1950s had vivid memories of the Great Depression or wartime rationing. They understood what it meant to have limited food supplies. That experience created deep appreciation for ordinary meals that younger generations sometimes take for granted. Wastefulness seemed almost disrespectful. Every slice of bread, every potato, every apple, and every leftover serving carried value, because people remembered times when such foods had been difficult to obtain. By the end of the decade, supermarkets had begun introducing more convenience products, frozen dinners, and packaged snacks, quietly signaling changes that would reshape eating habits in the years ahead. Yet for much of the 1950s, many households still followed older traditions rooted in home cooking, moderation, and practicality. The foods themselves were wonderfully ordinary, but together they formed a pattern that quietly protected against overeating, long before scientists fully understood why. Looking back from the modern world, it becomes clear that the unspoken foods keeping many women slim were never isolated miracles hidden inside recipe books. They were woven into an entire way of living. Fresh vegetables from gardens, seasonal fruit, homemade soups, oatmeal, beans, eggs, cottage cheese, baked fish, modest portions of meat, whole potatoes, simple salads, homemade bread, and carefully prepared leftovers all work together within a lifestyle built on patience rather than speed. Meals were prepared with intention, eaten with attention, and followed by lives filled with movement instead of endless sitting. That quiet combination created something remarkably powerful. A way of eating that felt completely ordinary to those living through it, yet now appears almost extraordinary in an age where convenience often replaces tradition. The greatest secret of all may simply have been that these women never searched for secret foods in the first place. They trusted the timeless wisdom of simple ingredients, sensible portions, and everyday routines, allowing those quiet habits to accomplish what countless modern diet trends still struggle to achieve. As the years passed quietly through the decade, countless women developed an instinctive understanding of food that required no nutrition labels, no calorie calculators, and no expert advice. They learned by watching their mothers, grandmothers, neighbors, and friends. Recipes were exchanged across backyard fences, handwritten on index cards or tucked inside well-worn cookbooks stained with years of flour and butter. Cooking was treated as a practical life skill rather than a complicated science. Every meal reflected experience gathered over generations, and although few people spoke about healthy eating in modern terms, many everyday choices naturally encouraged balance. One particularly common sight was a bowl of fresh fruit sitting permanently on the kitchen table. Apples, oranges, pears, or bananas waited within easy reach throughout the week. Because fruit remained visible, It often became the first thing someone reached for when feeling slightly hungry. Contrast that with many modern kitchens where fruit is hidden inside refrigerator drawers while cookies, chips and sweets occupy the most convenient shelves. Without realizing it, families in the 1950s arranged their homes in ways that quietly encouraged healthier choices. Even the act of baking reflected remarkable patience. A woman preparing bread or pies often spent several hours measuring ingredients, kneading dough, waiting for it to rise, and carefully monitoring the oven. This effort naturally limited how often rich baked goods appeared. Cakes celebrated birthdays, cookies might appear on weekends, fresh pies welcomed holidays or harvest seasons. Homemade desserts were treasured precisely because they required time. There was little temptation to eat cake every evening when creating one demanded an entire afternoon. Another forgotten favourite was baked squash. Acorn squash, butternut squash, and pumpkin frequently appeared during autumn and winter. Their naturally sweet flavour paired beautifully with cinnamon, nutmeg, or a tiny amount of butter. These vegetables filled the stomach comfortably while adding colour and variety to dinner tables. They also stored remarkably well through colder months, making them practical choices before year-round global food distribution became common. Fish chowders quietly warmed many coastal communities. Unlike modern restaurant versions overflowing with heavy cream, homemade chowders often emphasized fish, potatoes, onions, celery, herbs, and milk in balanced proportions. A steaming bowl served with a slice of homemade bread provided satisfying nourishment without excessive richness. Families appreciated these meals because they were economical, filling, and perfect for colder weather. Many women also prepared homemade puddings from scratch. Vanilla pudding, rice pudding, bread pudding, and tapioca pudding required simple ingredients like milk, eggs, sugar, and starch. Because each serving was made at home, portions remained modest. There were no giant dessert cups filled with whipped toppings and candy. Instead, a small bowl concluded dinner with quiet satisfaction. Seasonal preserving continued to shape the year's meals. During late summer, kitchens became busy with peaches, tomatoes, cucumbers, beans, and berries. Shelves slowly filled with neatly labelled jars prepared for winter. The process demanded hours of washing, peeling, boiling, sealing, and storing. Every preserved jar represented future meals already planned months. This careful preparation reduced dependence on expensive processed foods while keeping nutritious ingredients available throughout the year. Fresh herbs remained surprisingly important despite their simplicity. A handful of parsley brightened soup. Dill transformed potatoes. Chives flavoured scrambled eggs. Sage accompanied roasted poultry. These herbs added remarkable flavour without requiring rich sauces or excessive salt. Women often clipped them directly from small gardens beside the kitchen door, using only what was needed for that day's meal. Another overlooked habit involved eating according to the weather. On hot summer afternoons, meals naturally became lighter. Cold chicken, sliced tomatoes, cucumber salads, fresh peaches, watermelon, and iced tea replaced heavy stews. During winter, soups, roasted vegetables, baked potatoes, and hearty casseroles returned. Meals adapted to the seasons, instead of remaining identical throughout the year. This constant variation helped families enjoy a wide range of foods over the course of 12 months. Even leftovers carried a sense of creativity. Cold mashed potatoes became potato cakes lightly browned in a skillet. Leftover vegetables disappeared into omelettes. Extra rice found new life inside puddings or casseroles. Nothing seemed ordinary for long, because each remaining ingredient inspired another meal. This practical ingenuity reduced waste while keeping food interesting, without requiring constant grocery shopping. The social customs surrounding meals also deserve attention. Unexpected visitors often received coffee and a slice of homemade cake or fresh fruit rather than elaborate feasts. Hospitality focused on sharing what was already available rather than purchasing large amounts of extra food. Friends gathered to talk, laugh, and enjoy one another's company, with food serving as a pleasant companion instead of the entire event. Another fascinating difference involved children's eating habits. Many youngsters spent hours outdoors, riding bicycles, climbing trees, playing baseball, skipping rope, or simply exploring neighborhoods until sunset. They arrived home genuinely hungry after expending enormous amounts of energy. Meals satisfied real physical hunger rather than boredom created by long hours indoors. Mothers rarely needed to persuade active children to eat vegetables after an afternoon filled with outdoor play. There was also far less emphasis on eating while traveling. Long car journeys often included packed sandwiches, fruit, and homemade cookies prepared before leaving home. Roadside restaurants certainly existed, but families did not automatically purchase meals every time they traveled. Planning ahead remained both economical and practical. Perhaps one of the most powerful yet invisible habits involved respect for routine. Breakfast happened in the morning. Lunch arrived around midday. Dinner came during the early evening. Between those meals, life continued. People worked, cleaned, gardened, studied, sewed, repaired clothing, visited neighbors, and completed countless responsibilities without constantly interrupting their day to snack. This predictable rhythm allowed hunger and fullness to operate naturally, creating balance without conscious effort. Looking back today, it is easy to imagine that women of the 1950s possessed some mysterious dietary secret. In reality, their greatest advantage may have been the absence of modern excess. They lived in a world with fewer processed foods, fewer sugary drinks, fewer giant portions, fewer opportunities for mindless eating, and fewer advertisements encouraging constant consumption. Their kitchens centered on ingredients rather than convenience. Their meals followed predictable routines, and their desserts remained genuine treats instead of daily expectations. The unspoken foods that quietly helped many women remain slim were never glamorous. They were bowls of oatmeal warming gently on the stove before sunrise. They were crisp apples resting in fruit bowls, cabbage simmering inside soup pots, carrots freshly pulled from backyard gardens, eggs gathered for breakfast, tomatoes ripening on sunny windowsills, beans soaking overnight, potatoes baking slowly in the oven, and homemade bread cooling beneath clean kitchen towels. None of these foods promised miracle results. None claimed to melt away unwanted pounds. Yet together, they supported a lifestyle built upon simplicity, patience, moderation, and appreciation for real food. That quiet collection of ordinary meals became one of the decade's least celebrated strengths, reminding us that lasting health often grows not from dramatic changes, but from thousands of humble choices repeated faithfully day after day, season after season. around the warm heart of an ordinary family kitchen. As another quiet morning arrived somewhere in suburban America, sunlight slowly crept across polished kitchen floors, reflecting softly from chrome table legs and enamel cookware that had already served countless family meals. The house was peaceful except for the gentle whistle of a kettle and the rhythmic sound of toast popping from the toaster. There was something remarkably predictable about these mornings, and that predictability shaped eating habits in ways that modern life rarely allows. Breakfast happened because it was time for breakfast, not because someone had skipped dinner the night before or stayed awake until 2 in the morning scrolling through endless entertainment. Daily routines created natural boundaries around food, and those boundaries quietly prevented many forms of overeating that would become increasingly common in later decades. Even shopping itself encouraged restraint. Many women carried only enough cash for the groceries they had planned to purchase. Credit cards were not yet a normal part of everyday shopping, so impulse buying remained limited by the money already inside a handbag. A shopping list represented careful planning rather than vague ideas. Flour, milk, eggs, potatoes, onions, carrots, apples, cabbage, oatmeal, coffee, bread, butter, and a few cuts of meat often appeared week after week because these ingredients formed the foundation of dependable family meals. Walking through the grocery store took less time because there were simply fewer products competing for attention. Fresh milk occupied an especially important place in daily life. In many neighborhoods, milk was still delivered directly to homes, arriving in sturdy glass bottles placed neatly beside the front door before sunrise. Housewives often collected the bottles while the morning air remained cool, bringing them inside before beginning breakfast preparations. That milk found its way into oatmeal, mashed potatoes, homemade puddings, soups, sauces, coffee, and glasses served alongside meals. It was treated as nourishment rather than a sweet dessert beverage. Another quietly nourishing food was homemade scrambled eggs mixed with vegetables. Leftover onions, tomatoes, spinach, or green peppers often disappeared into the frying pan instead of being thrown away. This practical habit increased vegetable consumption without requiring separate side dishes. Breakfast became another opportunity to include wholesome ingredients rather than relying solely on refined carbohydrates. Simple baked beans remained popular in many homes, particularly during cooler months. Slow, cooked with onions and mild seasonings, they provided a filling source of protein and fiber that lasted for hours. A modest serving alongside eggs or whole grain toast created a satisfying breakfast or lunch without excessive richness. Beans required patience to prepare, but once cooked, they stretched across several meals with remarkable economy. Many women also kept homemade chicken stock, ready in the refrigerator or pantry. Whenever vegetables began looking slightly tired or leftover meat accumulated, everything could quickly become soup. Nothing needed to be wasted because nearly every ingredient found a second purpose. This ability to transform leftovers into nourishing meals reflected years of practical experience rather than formal culinary training. One subtle difference involved the smell of the kitchen itself. Modern homes are often filled with the scent of packaged snacks, microwave meals, or takeout containers. In contrast, 1950s kitchens frequently smelled of simmering vegetables, freshly baked bread, roasted meat, cinnamon onions, slowly cooking in butter, or coffee gently brewing on the stove. Those familiar aromas became part of family life, creating powerful memories associated with homemade food rather than commercial products. Another forgotten food was plain gelatin prepared with fresh fruit. While some famous gelatin recipes became elaborate centerpieces at parties, everyday versions were often refreshingly simple. Slices of peaches, pears, oranges, or berries suspended inside lightly sweetened gelatin offered a cool dessert during warm weather. Compared with heavy pastries or rich ice cream sundaes, these desserts felt surprisingly light while still satisfying a desire for something sweet. Housewives also became masters of preparing filling meals from inexpensive vegetables. Turnips, rutabagas, parsnips, beets and onions regularly appeared during winter because they stored well and remained affordable. These root vegetables added natural sweetness and hearty texture to soups, stews, and roasted dinners. Today they are sometimes overlooked, yet they formed the backbone of countless nutritious meals during the decade. The family dining table itself deserves attention. Plates were usually cleared before dessert appeared. Once dessert ended, the meal concluded. Food did not remain scattered around the living room for hours, while everyone continued nibbling absent-mindedly. The clear beginning and ending of meals helped establish satisfying routines. When dinner finished, attention shifted naturally toward conversation, reading, sewing, hobbies, or preparing for the following day rather than returning repeatedly to the kitchen. Seasonal celebrations also reflected moderation. Summer picnics included fried chicken, potato salad, watermelon, corn on the cob, and homemade lemonade. But these occasions remained occasional pleasures instead of weekly habits. Autumn brought apple picking, pumpkin pies, and harvest festivals. Winter introduced hearty soups and holiday cookies. Spring welcomed asparagus, fresh greens, and strawberries. Every season carried its own foods, making the passing of the year feel tangible through changing flavors rather than constant repetition. Many women also practiced careful portioning without measuring anything. They understood approximately how much meat would feed 4 people, how many potatoes were needed for dinner, or how much soup each family member usually enjoyed. Experience guided serving sizes far more effectively than written calorie recommendations. Their understanding developed gradually through years spent preparing meals every single day. Perhaps the most remarkable difference was psychological rather than nutritional. Food rarely carried the emotional burden. It often does today. Women certainly enjoyed favorite dishes, celebrated holidays with special meals, and occasionally baked wonderful desserts. But everyday eating remained largely practical. Stress, boredom, loneliness, or frustration were less frequently answered by opening the refrigerator because daily life offered many other responsibilities competing for attention. Gardens required watering, clothes needed mending, floors demanded sweeping, children required care, and neighbors frequently visited. Food occupied an important place, but it did not become the center of emotional life. Looking back across the decade, it becomes increasingly clear that no mysterious ingredient was quietly keeping women slim. Instead, hundreds of ordinary habits worked together almost invisibly. Meals built around vegetables instead of processed snacks. Seasonal fruit instead of constant sweets. Homemade soups instead of oversized fast food lunches. Water, milk, coffee, and tea instead of endless sugary drinks. Smaller plates, slower meals, home gardens, practical leftovers, limited snacking, and kitchens filled with real ingredients rather than ready, made temptations. None of these choices appeared extraordinary on their own. Yet together, they formed a remarkably balanced way of living. The forgotten foods of the 1950s remind us that health was often supported not by chasing perfection, but by embracing consistency. Every apple sliced for breakfast, every cabbage added to soup, every carrot peeled for dinner, every loaf of bread baked by hand, and every bowl of oatmeal served before sunrise quietly contributed to a lifestyle that valued nourishment over excess. These women were not trying to unlock the latest diet secret. They were simply feeding their families with care, patience, and common sense. Ironically, that very absence of obsession may have been the greatest secret of all. Long before health became an industry, ordinary kitchens across America quietly demonstrated that simple food, prepared thoughtfully and eaten with moderation, could sustain both body and family through the changing seasons of everyday life. Picture the final hours of an ordinary evening in the late 1950s. The dinner dishes have been washed and carefully stacked inside wooden cabinets. The kitchen counters have been wiped clean with a damp cloth, and the lights above the stove cast a warm glow across a room that has already completed its work for the day. A pie may still be cooling on the windowsill, but no one feels compelled to cut another slice before bed simply because it is there. The refrigerator door stays closed for the rest of the evening, and the family gradually drifts toward books, conversation, knitting, radio programs, or an early night's sleep. The kitchen quietly rests until morning, and so do the people who depend on it. That simple ending to the day may have been one of the most overlooked habits of the decade. Food had its proper place, and once meals were finished, life continued without constantly revolving around the next opportunity to eat. Many women also believed in serving colourful plates long before nutrition experts encouraged people to eat the rainbow. Bright orange carrots, deep green beans, ruby, red tomatoes, pale yellow corn, dark leafy spinach, snowy cauliflower, and purple beets frequently appeared together throughout the week. Colour was not chosen for social media photographs. It simply reflected the changing harvests and the variety available at local markets. Without realizing it, families consumed a broad range of vitamins and minerals through naturally colourful meals. Zone humble food that quietly disappeared from many modern tables was stewed prunes with citrus peel, served at breakfast or alongside dinner. They offered natural sweetness along with fibre that helped digestion. While younger generations later mocked prunes as old-fashioned, they remained a practical pantry staple because they stored well, required no refrigeration, and could be transformed into satisfying dishes with very little effort. Fresh cucumbers became especially popular during the warmer months. Thin slices were often dressed with vinegar, onions, and a pinch of sugar, creating a crisp salad that cooled the body during hot afternoons. Unlike creamy modern side dishes, cucumber salads felt light and refreshing while adding very little richness to the meal. Their simplicity perfectly reflected the practical cooking style of the era. Another commonly forgotten ingredient was celery. Today it is often treated merely as something to dip into spreads, but in the 1950s celery found its way into soups, chicken, salads, stuffing, casseroles, vegetable trays, and even simple snacks spread with a little cream cheese or peanut butter. Its satisfying crunch and high water content helped create filling meals without requiring heavy ingredients. Fresh herbs often arrived directly from small gardens or neighborhood markets, rather than plastic containers transported across continents. Chopped parsley brightened potatoes, thyme-flavored roasted chicken, rosemary-seasoned vegetables, and basil quietly found its way into tomato dishes during the summer months. These herbs allowed women to create satisfying meals using flavor instead of excessive fat. Even breakfast remained surprisingly predictable from one week to the next. Monday's oatmeal might become Tuesday's eggs, Wednesday's wheat cereal, Thursday's toast with fruit, and Friday's pancakes prepared from scratch. There was little pressure to invent elaborate breakfasts every morning. The consistency itself became comforting, and because portions remained moderate, people rarely started the day feeling sluggish or overly full. Many women also believed strongly in eating what was available locally whenever possible. Farmers' markets offered fresh produce picked only hours earlier, while neighborhood butchers knew their customers personally and often recommended affordable cuts that could become excellent meals with slow cooking. This close relationship between families and local food suppliers encouraged freshness while reducing dependence on highly processed products. An often overlooked difference involved the pace of cooking itself. A stew might simmer gently for 3 or 4 hours. Bread dough rested patiently beneath a towel until it doubled in size. Apples baked slowly until their skins split open, beans soaked overnight before cooking the following day. These long preparation times filled homes with comforting aromas that built anticipation long before anyone sat down to eat. Meals became events worth waiting for rather than something hurriedly consumed between other activities. Simple fruit desserts remained remarkably elegant despite their modest ingredients. Sliced peaches topped with a spoonful of fresh cream, baked pears dusted with cinnamon, chilled melons served after dinner, or oranges carefully peeled and arranged in glass bowls demonstrated that sweetness did not require excessive sugar. Nature often provided enough flavor on its own. There was also a deep respect for the changing seasons that influenced every shopping trip. Spring meant asparagus and lettuce. Summer brought tomatoes, berries, peaches, and sweet corn. Autumn introduced apples, squash, pumpkins, and pears. Winter encouraged root, vegetables, cabbage, onions, and preserved fruits. Rather than fighting the seasons, families embraced them, creating natural variety throughout the year while appreciating each harvest as it arrived. Another forgotten habit involved making food stretch across generations. Mothers taught daughters how to bake bread, preserve peaches, prepare soups, roast chickens, and season vegetables through quiet observation rather than formal lessons. Children stood on wooden stools beside kitchen counters, helping stir batter or shell peas while absorbing cooking knowledge almost without realizing it. Healthy eating habits developed naturally because they were woven into everyday family life. The dining room itself often encouraged moderation. Meals were served from shared dishes placed in the center of the table, allowing everyone to take reasonable portions before passing the bowls along. There was an unspoken understanding that food should be enjoyed, but enough should remain for everyone. This quiet sense of consideration naturally discouraged piling enormous amounts onto individual plates. Even the rhythm of conversation influenced how much people ate. Stories about school, Neighborhood news, weekend plans, or relatives filled the pauses between bites. Laughter slowed the pace of dinner. People listened as much as they ate. By the time conversations reached their natural conclusion, most appetites had already been satisfied. Perhaps the greatest lesson hidden inside those ordinary kitchens was that food rarely needed to compete for attention. Meals did not have to be larger, sweeter, saltier, or richer than the previous day's dinner in order to feel enjoyable. Familiar recipes remained beloved for years because satisfaction came from comfort, routine, and shared experiences rather than constant novelty. Looking back from the perspective of today, it becomes clear that the women of the 1950s quietly benefited from a food culture built around restraint without feeling deprived. They enjoyed homemade pies, fresh bread, roast dinners, ice cream on summer evenings, and holiday feasts. Yet these pleasures existed within a larger pattern of balanced eating. Their everyday tables were filled with vegetables harvested in season, fruits enjoyed at their peak, soups simmered from scratch, eggs prepared simply, beans cooked patiently, oatmeal served warmly, fish baked gently, potatoes roasted naturally, and salads assembled with fresh ingredients. There were no miracle foods promising instant transformation, no celebrity diets demanding impossible discipline, and no endless search for nutritional shortcuts. Instead, there was a quiet confidence that ordinary ingredients, prepared with care and eaten in sensible amounts, were more than enough. Decades later, that forgotten confidence may be one of the most valuable recipes the 1950s left behind. A reminder that lasting health often grows from simple habits repeated faithfully around the family table, one humble meal at a time. As the decade moved toward its close, subtle changes were already beginning to appear. Supermarkets grew larger, convenience foods slowly claimed more shelf space, and advertisers started promising that modern living could become faster and easier. With every new product, yet inside many ordinary homes, the older habits still held their ground. Mothers continued tying aprons before dinner. Bread still rose beneath clean kitchen towels, vegetables still simmered gently on the stove, and children still learned that meals happened at the table rather than wherever they happened to be standing. Looking back today, those everyday routines seem almost peaceful, offering a glimpse into a world where food occupied an important place in life without completely taking it over. One forgotten feature of the era was how little emphasis people placed on constant variety. Modern supermarkets encourage shoppers to try something new every week, while restaurants compete to create increasingly extravagant dishes. In contrast, many women in the 1950s prepared the same trusted recipes dozens of times every year. A favorite chicken soup might appear every Tuesday throughout the winter. Meatloaf returned regularly. Pot roast became Sunday's dependable centerpiece. Rather than becoming bored, families found comfort in familiar flavors. Familiar meals reduced unnecessary temptation because people were eating to satisfy hunger instead of chasing constant excitement. Simple porridges also remained common beyond breakfast. During colder evenings, some families prepared warm cereals as light suppers, especially after large midday meals. These bowls of oats or wheat, served with milk and a touch of cinnamon, felt comforting without overwhelming the stomach before bedtime. They reflected a practical understanding that not every meal needed to be elaborate. Fresh green onions often appeared straight from backyard gardens. Chopped finely into salads, scrambled eggs, cottage cheese, or soups, they added brightness and flavour with almost no effort. Herbs and vegetables frequently replaced heavy sauces because they were inexpensive, readily available, and naturally delicious. Women also paid close attention to ripeness. Bananas that became too soft turned into homemade banana bread. Overripe tomatoes became soup or sauce. Apples with bruises transformed into applesauce. Vegetables nearing the end of their freshness disappeared into stews before they spoiled. Nothing needed to look perfect, because appearance mattered far less than usefulness. One particularly interesting habit involved serving smaller evening meals after substantial lunches in many households. Especially where someone worked close to home, the midday meal could be the largest of the day. Dinner later in the evening might consist of soup, sandwiches, salad, fruit, or leftovers rather than another enormous feast. This rhythm naturally prevented late-night overeating while still providing enough nourishment for the following morning. Seasonal seafood quietly supported coastal communities as well. Fresh shrimp, clams, oysters, and local fish appeared whenever fishermen brought in successful catches. Families often prepared these foods simply, allowing their natural flavors to shine instead of covering them with thick batters or heavy sauces. Lemon, parsley, butter, and gentle seasoning were often all that was needed. Another overlooked difference involved homemade beverages. Lemonade was squeezed by hand, iced tea was brewed from loose leaves or tea bags, and fruit juices were prepared from fresh produce whenever possible. These drinks required effort, making them occasional pleasures instead of endless refreshments consumed throughout the day. Water remained the simplest and most dependable choice between meals. Even the sound of the kitchen contributed to the experience. Instead of microwave beeps and delivery notifications, the room echoed with the chopping of vegetables, the bubbling of soup, the gentle crackle of bread baking in the oven, and the quiet whistle of a kettle. Preparing meals engaged every sense, creating a stronger connection between cooks and the food they served. Many women also believed that wasting food reflected poor household management. Leftover mashed potatoes became breakfast hash, extra roast beef-filled sandwiches, remaining vegetables flavored tomorrow's soup. Pie crust scraps were sprinkled with cinnamon and baked into small treats for children. This creativity meant fewer unnecessary purchases and greater appreciation for every ingredient brought home from the market. Gardening remained another hidden advantage. Even tiny backyard gardens produced lettuce, tomatoes, beans, cucumbers, peppers, carrots, herbs, and berries. Children often helped water plants, pull weeds, or harvest vegetables, learning exactly where food came from long before supermarkets became the primary connection between families and agriculture. Vegetables picked only minutes before dinner retained remarkable freshness that encouraged everyone to eat more of them. Another forgotten custom involved preserving modest appetites. Parents generally discouraged children from filling up on sweets before meals because they understood it would spoil dinner. That simple rule quietly ensured that vegetables, soups, meat, and fruit remained the foundation of daily nutrition rather than sugary snacks. Many women also trusted their own senses more than written recipes. They judged soup by its aroma, bread dough by its texture, fruit by its fragrance, and vegetables by their color. Cooking became an intimate relationship with ingredients rather than a rigid process measured down to the smallest detail. This confidence developed through repetition and experience, allowing simple foods to become consistently satisfying. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the decade was that healthy eating rarely felt like a separate project. There was no constant conversation about dieting, detoxing, counting carbohydrates, or eliminating entire food groups from daily life. Women certainly cared about appearance, but their kitchens focused first on feeding families well. The balance emerged naturally because ordinary meals already contained vegetables, fruits, grains, modest portions of meat, dairy, and homemade dishes prepared with care. Looking back after more than half a century, the unspoken foods that quietly helped many women remain slim seem almost ordinary to the point of being invisible. Bowls of oatmeal steaming before sunrise, fresh apples resting patiently in wooden fruit bowls, carrots peeled for evening soup, cabbage shredded into crisp salads, eggs gathered for breakfast, beans simmering gently all afternoon, potatoes baking in warm ovens, tomatoes ripening in backyard gardens, homemade bread cooling beneath linen towels, cottage cheese served with peaches, roast chicken stretched across several family meals, simple fish baked with herbs and lemon, seasonal berries enjoyed while they lasted, then patiently awaited again the following year. None of these foods promised miracles. None claimed to melt away unwanted weight or transform lives in 30 days. Their quiet strength came from something much deeper. They belonged to a slower rhythm of living where meals were planned instead of improvised. Hunger was respected instead of feared. Desserts remained special instead of ordinary, and food served families rather than constantly demanding their attention. The women of the 1950s may never have realized they were leaving behind a lesson for future generations, but their kitchens still whisper it today. Sometimes the healthiest way of eating is not hidden inside complicated formulas or expensive products. Sometimes it begins with ordinary ingredients, prepared patiently, shared generously, eaten mindfully, and repeated day after day until those simple habits become a way of life that feels so natural it hardly seems like a secret at all. As the lights in the neighborhood gradually went out, and another ordinary day came to a close, kitchens across America settled into a peaceful silence that feels almost unfamiliar today. The stove had cooled. The dishes were neatly stacked in cupboards. Tomorrow's lunch ingredients were already waiting inside the refrigerator, and a handwritten shopping list might be resting on the kitchen counter for the next trip to the market. Nothing about the room suggested urgency. There was no pressure to chase the newest health trend or experiment with the latest miracle ingredient. Instead, there was quiet confidence that another day of simple home cooking would be more than enough. Looking back now, that confidence may have been one of the greatest nutritional advantages of the entire decade. One forgotten detail involved how closely women understood the foods they prepared. They knew exactly where the eggs had come from, whether the tomatoes had ripened in the backyard, which local farm supplied the milk, and which butcher had prepared the week's roast. Food still had a story. Every ingredient carried a connection to a nearby field, orchard, garden, or neighborhood shop. That closeness encouraged appreciation because meals did not arrive anonymously inside brightly colored packaging. Even ordinary breakfasts reflected remarkable consistency. There was little desire to create extravagant morning feasts every day. A bowl of oatmeal on Monday felt just as satisfying as it had the previous Monday. 2 scrambled eggs with toast remained perfectly acceptable week after week. Fresh fruit appeared whenever it was available. These repetitive meals quietly removed much of the temptation to overindulge, because breakfast existed to provide steady energy rather than endless excitement. Women also relied heavily on the natural flavors of vegetables. Fresh peas were sweet enough without heavy sauces. Carrots became wonderfully rich after roasting. Tomatoes required little more than salt and pepper. Corn tasted delicious with only a small amount of butter. The vegetables themselves became the stars of the meal, rather than simply serving as decoration beside larger portions of meat. Lone humble pantry staple that deserves recognition is dried lentils. Although not as frequently discussed as beans, lentils occasionally appeared in soups and stews because they cooked relatively quickly while providing lasting nourishment. Their earthy flavor blended beautifully with onions, carrots, celery, and herbs, producing hearty meals that cost very little while satisfying the entire family. Another quiet habit involved ending meals before feeling completely full. Without consciously describing it this way, many women simply recognized the pleasant point where hunger had disappeared, but discomfort had not yet arrived. Because meals unfolded slowly through conversation, it became easier to notice this feeling. There was rarely a sense of racing to finish enormous portions before returning to other responsibilities. Fresh pears offered another seasonal pleasure. Unlike modern fruit cups packed in sugary syrup, ripe pears were enjoyed exactly as nature produced them. Their delicate sweetness made them ideal for breakfast, lunchboxes, or light desserts. Apples, peaches, and pears each took their turn throughout the year, reminding families that every season brought something worth anticipating. Homemade vegetable broths quietly filled homes with comforting aromas during colder months. Onion skins, celery tops, carrot ends, parsley stems, and leftover bones simmered together for hours, extracting every possible bit of flavor before becoming the foundation for soups and sauces. This careful use of ingredients reflected remarkable resourcefulness, ensuring that nourishment extended far beyond the obvious parts of every meal. Women also appreciated foods that naturally stayed fresh for long periods. Potatoes, onions, squash, cabbage, carrots, apples, and dried beans could be stored for weeks or even months under proper conditions. These reliable ingredients guaranteed that wholesome meals remained possible, regardless of weather, harvests, or unexpected financial difficulties. Even celebrations quietly demonstrated moderation. A birthday cake occupied the center of the table for one evening, but the following morning breakfast returned to oatmeal or eggs. Christmas cookies filled tins during the holidays. Yet January quickly welcomed soups, vegetables, and ordinary family dinners once again. Rich foods remained part of life without gradually becoming everyday expectations. Another overlooked difference involved physical satisfaction after meals. The foods commonly eaten during the 1950s digested slowly because they contained fiber, protein, and relatively little processing. A bowl of bean soup, baked potato, fresh vegetables, and roast chicken could comfortably satisfy someone until the next meal without creating the rapid hunger often associated with highly refined foods. This natural fullness reduced the desire for unnecessary snacks throughout the afternoon or evening. Many women also spent significant time preserving kitchen traditions. Favorite recipes were carefully copied into notebooks, passed to daughters before weddings, or shared with neighbors over cups of coffee. These recipes evolved gradually rather than changing every month according to fashionable trends. Their longevity reflected trust earned through years of dependable results. The family table itself remained one of the home's most important gathering places. Meals offered opportunities to exchange stories, solve problems, celebrate achievements, and comfort one another after difficult days. Food nourished relationships as much as it nourished bodies. That emotional connection reduced the tendency to eat alone, distracted, or in constant haste. Looking back, it becomes increasingly difficult to separate the foods themselves from the lifestyle surrounding them. Oatmeal seemed ordinary because mornings were unhurried. Homemade soup felt satisfying because families gathered together to enjoy it. Fresh fruit tasted sweeter because it arrived only during its natural season. Vegetables became more appealing because they were harvested nearby and cooked with care. Even leftovers carried meaning because they represented gratitude rather than inconvenience. Perhaps that is the true lesson quietly hidden inside the kitchens of the 1950s. The women of that era did not remain slim because they possessed secret recipes unavailable to future generations. They remained healthy because their ordinary foods existed within an ordinary life filled with movement, routine, patience, moderation, and respect for simple ingredients. Their kitchens were not laboratories searching for miracle diets. They were places where bread rose slowly, soup simmered gently, vegetables changed with the seasons, desserts marked special occasions, and families gathered every evening around the same familiar table. Today, those habits may seem almost nostalgic, even romantic. Yet beneath the nostalgia lies something surprisingly practical. The forgotten foods of the 1950s remind us that health rarely depends upon extraordinary ingredients. More often, it grows quietly from everyday choices repeated over months and years. A bowl of oatmeal instead of sugary pastries, fresh fruit instead of constant candy, homemade soup instead of processed meals, vegetables filling half the plate, modest portions enjoyed slowly, leftovers respected rather than wasted, and kitchens built around cooking instead of convenience. Those simple decisions rarely attracted attention while they were happening, but together they created a way of eating so balanced and sustainable that many women never considered themselves to be following any particular diet at all. Their greatest secret was not hidden inside one remarkable food. It was woven into the quiet rhythm of ordinary days, where every humble meal gently reinforced the next, creating a lifetime of healthy habits, almost without anyone noticing.